East and North Africa. Currently, our research focus is on governance of responsible data and artificial intelligence, fair work in the platform economy, gig work, cloud work, innovation, gender, and inclusion in Egypt, the Middle East, and North Africa, with close collaboration with our partners in the rest of Africa. We actually do celebrate our 15th anniversary next February. So among our diverse activity is what brings us here today. We are the proud developers of the MENA Observatory on Responsible AI, where we also have the wonderful partnerships with our colleagues at the African Observatory on Responsible AI, who are our co-hosts for today's webinar. I welcome you all and welcome our wonderful speakers who I will introduce shortly. Before we proceed, allow me to show a few housekeeping points that I ask my team to share the slide. The duration of the webinar is 90 minutes. It is being live streamed and recorded. After the introductory session, we will have a round of short presentations from our speakers, a brief round of questions to the panelists, and then Q&A from the audience. You're welcome to place your questions in the chat box, and we will curate the questions and I will read them to our speakers. Great, I see Silas has joined as well. So allow me to say, in the little time that I have, a few words about the webinar series. Our webinar today is titled Multi-Stakeholder Collaboration for Responsible AI Development in Africa. It is the second in a webinar series that we are jointly developing with our wonderful partners at the African Observatory on Responsible AI. The series is titled Responsible AI in the Global South. It is developed jointly between our two observatories, and the aim of the series is to highlight perspectives from the Middle East and from Africa, focused on nuanced, context-specific approaches to governance of responsible AI and data for development. We aim to foster cross-regional collaboration and amplify the voices of local knowledge holders, addressing the crucial topics such as ethical considerations, regulatory frameworks, and societal impacts of AI technologies in the regions. Our first webinar was held last July, titled Responsible AI in the Global South, Narratives. Sorry, I have a bit of noise. This is Cairo, sorry about that. Titled Responsible AI in the Global South, Narratives from the Middle East and Africa. I invite my partner and co-host, Dr. Fola Adeleke, the Executive Director of the Global Center on AI Governance, who are hosting the African Observatory on AI, to say a few words about the observatory, the African Observatory on Responsible AI. Fola, would you like to take the mic? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Nagla, and welcome to everyone. Thank you for attending our webinar today. It's a pleasure to see so many familiar faces in the room, and thank you also to our guests who are going to be leading the conversation we're going to be having for the next 90 minutes. The African Observatory on Responsible AI is a project that has been running since 2022 and has been primarily established to bring African voices, African values, and experiences to global debates on AI. Our aim is to deepen networks across the continent, and we do this by hosting conversations like this. We are also very interested in strengthening the capacity on responsible AI on the continent. One of those initiatives in relation to this is the short course on AI and human rights in Africa, which we recently launched in partnership with the University of Pretoria. We had the first certificate course hosted 2 weeks ago, had 50 participants from 20 countries, and it's going to be an annual offering at the University of Pretoria. We also host a certificate course on AI, ethics and policy in Africa with the University of Cape Town, and that is also going to be a biannual offering that is going to be extended to Africans all over. We are also big on research, and we've been working with various institutional partners, including the African Union, UNESCO, and other stakeholders in building policy research and analysis on equitable AI governance on the continent. We serve as a secretariat to a number of important initiatives, including AI4D, as well as the Africa-Asia Policy Network. And we are hoping that through these various initiatives, we can indeed bring Africa's unique experiences and expertise in ensuring that responsible AI that is deployed on the continent is indeed responsive to our unique needs. So thank you all, and I hope that we have a very lovely conversation today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fola. Allow me then to say a few words about the observatory before I introduce our speakers and the subject of our discussion today. The MENA Observatory on Responsible AI developed and organized, hosted by the Access to Knowledge for Development Center at IDRC, is a locally driven platform aiming to make key contributions to global narratives on responsible data and AI. We are grateful to the support of Canada's International Development Research Centre and the partnership with Birzeit University. The observatory serves as a regional hub championing MENA voices, providing varied resources on responsible AI and data in both English and Arabic. I invite my team to post in the chat links to the MENA Observatory and to the African Observatory as well. So we aim to foster a collaborative network of AI researchers, legal experts and advocates, policymakers, civil society, and the general public. The observatory was soft launched last February with the current activities and great plans for expansion and scaling out for 2025 and beyond. And we stand to learn from our friends at the African Observatory who have done great work since the inception of the platform. Now I turn to today's discussion. I will mention the title of the workshop again. I will introduce our speakers, and then I'll say a few words about the subject. The title is Multi-Stakeholder Collaboration for Responsible AI Development in Africa. With us to speak about this, I invite my team to the bios are very long. We have a fantastic group of speakers. So with their permission, I have taken a few lines. I will say a few lines about each, but there is a link to a document with their extended bios. And also I asked my team to show the pictures. We have Mr. Amr Safwat, Manager of African Multilateral Affairs, Ministry of Communication and Information Technology in Egypt. Mr. Safwat has extensive experience in digital diplomacy, setting and implementing ICT for development initiatives with international partners, formulating policy recommendations on digital cooperation with regional and international stakeholders, with a long history of developing and managing partnerships with multi-stakeholders on the regional and international levels, with special focus on Africa. Second, I just read in order. There's no, special order, so forgive me. There is Ms. Isobel Akwa from Rwanda. She is the Executive Director of the CERTA Foundation. Isabel is a dual qualified transactions and corporate advisory lawyer with extensive experience in investment banking, venture capital across Europe, Asia, and Middle East and Africa. She specializes in asset financing, preparing tech-enabled SMEs for investment, providing strategic solutions to corporate clients. As Exec Director of CERTA, Isobel focuses on multiple areas of research, including but not limited to the emerging areas of law and technology, startup empowerment, professional skills development. Our third speaker is Mr. Silas Adikundle from Nigeria. Silas is technology entrepreneur, co-founder and CEO at Reach Industries, co-founder and CEO of Awari. Again, all of them have a long, extensive bio. I will just pick a couple of lines. He's a Nigerian British investor, entrepreneur, robotics engineer, celebrated for creating Mekamon, the world's first intelligent gaming robot that blends robotics with augmented reality, catching global attention, leading to successful partnership with Apple for distribution in both US and UK. He's the founder and co-founder of a number of super successful initiatives, AI, robotics, entertainment, education, empowering young innovators. He's recognized on Forbes 30 under 30 Europe in technology and Financial Times top 100 minority ethnic leaders in technology lists. Last but not least, we have Ms. Leonida Mutuku from Kenya. She is the AI Research Director, Local Development Research Institute. Leonida is entrepreneur and researcher working at intersection of inclusive AI and development. Among her numerous activities, she is founder of Intel Pro, an African company building business management and analytics tools, enabling entrepreneurs to make sustainable and profitable decisions. AI research director and leader of the Accountable and Inclusive AI practice at Local Development Research Institute, Nairobi, co-founder of the nonprofit Quotidian Data. I meant to present our speakers first, and if you will allow me, I'll say a few words about what they will talk to us about. So, as I mentioned, the title is about multi-stakeholder collaboration. July 2024, the African Union's Continental Artificial Intelligence Strategy was launched with the subtitle of Harnessing AI for Africa's Development and Prosperity. The vision of the strategy, a prosperous and integrated, I quote, prosperous and integrated Africa where responsible, ethical, and African-centric AI is the axis of inclusive growth, resilience, socioeconomic development, people empowerment, and positioning the continent as a key player in the global AI landscape. Mission, quote, the mission is to harness AI for accelerating social and economic transformation and promoting cultural renaissance in Africa in line with the AU Agenda 2063 and the SDGs, to minimize the risks that AI poses to African people and countries, and to accelerate the development of the necessary AI capabilities of the African Union member states. Africa needs to capitalize on this transformative potential, not only to mitigate, but overcome the challenges, ensuring that AI is developed and implemented responsibly, ethically, and inclusively. Within this context, the strategy calls for a unified approach among the member states to effectively address technological advancements, advocating for ethical, responsible, and equitable practices that position Africa as a leader in inclusive development. Emphasis on the critical need for collaboration among various stakeholders. It underscores the importance of establishing a triple helix model that integrates research, civil society, private and public sectors in the design and execution of AI solutions for public services in Africa. The key recommendations includes plenty on that. I will not take time to do that. The strategy is available online, and I asked my team, arrange with them to post the link to the strategy on the chat box. I jump to the topic of our webinar today, focuses on the multi-stakeholder approach. We take that thread multi-stakeholder approach in shaping responsible AI strategies. Together, we explore how this multi-stakeholder collaboration can create pathways for responsible AI development that align with regional objectives. So I have introduced our wonderful speakers who you can see are, come from diverse specializations and backgrounds, or super rich, super insightful. And I invite our first speaker, Mr. Amr Safwat, to talk to us, to give the first talk. I have asked speakers to talk up to 10 minutes. Amr will talk to us under the title of the African Approach Towards Multi-Stakeholderism for Responsible AI from Policy to Implementation. Amr, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Dr. Nagla, for inviting me to this very interesting webinar. Just very quickly, because I'm very mindful of the time, I just have to register that I've been following your work, whether it's the MENA Observatory on responsible AI, and of course, I was introduced more to it during our first OECD AU dialogue, which I had the privilege to be in company with Dr. Nagma Hosseini at that time, and she excellently presented the work of your observatory. It's like it just grabbed the attention of everyone, not only myself, but everyone from different walks of the world and different areas where we represent, whether it's government, academia, private sector. So I wish to congratulate you and your team on this excellent work. Although you have just introduced and you have just started your work maybe a couple of months ago, or almost a year, just nearly a year. So thank you so much, and congratulations on this fabulous success. Thank you so much for the introduction, and really nice to be here among very group of excellent speakers, as well as those who have contributed a lot and achieved a lot, given their age is not that old, and I believe that all of us here are among those ones as well. So it's really interesting to be with them, and as a government representative, it's so interesting to me on a personal level and on a professional level as well to interact with the rest of the stakeholders, because as you have just mentioned that AI by nature, and this is what we believe, whether in the administrative communication IT in Egypt, but as well as on the African working group on AI, which I'm happy and honored to be the chair of this working group. We believe that AI, as its nature, it has a cross-border aspect. It's by nature, it's cross-border, it's transnational. So you cannot really help it without collaborating with everyone that works with, whether you're developing AI solutions, whether you are regulating AI solutions, whether AI will be implemented on you. You'll be using the AI, which is the citizens, the grassroots citizens. And those are the most important ones to all of us that really we're focusing on. Just very quickly, I prepared a presentation, so I'm not really sure if should I share the presentation, go like very quickly on slides, or just keep on talking as seamlessly as it takes, whatever you prefer.
I have to ask my team, the organizers, whatever is, can Mr. Safwat share his slides, Khadija?
Do you have the share option?
Yeah, let me try it. Yeah, I think it's working. Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I think sure. we have until 2:25, so please go.
Right. Yeah, sure, definitely. Yes, it's being uploaded. Just let me know once you see my screen. Okay. Yeah. Do you see the screen?
Not yet.
Okay, it's not yet obvious. So, apologies because of I'm opening like multiple pages and multiple things because actually I'm not in Cairo, I'm in Addis Ababa. I'm taking part in another round of negotiations on the CFTA.
Try again now. I think we lost him.
Dr. Nagla, you're muted.
We can give Amr a minute to rejoin. Otherwise, we can move on to the next speaker in the interest of time. Let's just wait a minute. I know he is not in Cairo, he's in Addis for meetings. So, okay. Okay, why don't we do the following? Why don't we move on to our next speaker, and just in the interest of time, and then we can shift back to Mr. Safwat next. Would that be okay? We can just write him a note. Can someone write him a note? I have my screen. Can someone write him a note that we will just move on to the next speaker and he can come next? Okay. Isobel, would you like to, sorry about that, would you like to start your 10 minutes now?
No problem. Let me see if I can get mine or if somebody can download it for me. I should be able to pull it up.
Why don't, yeah, okay.
Just as,
what we can do is we can go with, if any of the speakers can go without slides, we can go with that while we work out the slide issues. Okay, here you go. Isobel, okay,
can you see the slides? Okay.
Yes, Isobel, come on.
Perfect. Can you hear me?
Yes, and Khadija, can you write Mr. Safwat an email just to tell him that, we've moved on and we'll take his presentation next? I just don't want to leave my screen. So yes, go ahead, Isabel.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll be very brief. I think what Mr. Sawat was saying was, exactly right, that just the nature of AI requires us to think collaboratively. I always look at AI when we look at the actual real components of AI, the algorithms, the data, and the computing power, which kind of sounds weird because obviously I'm not a techie. I'm a lawyer and a governance person, but I think it's important when you're looking at this field that we have to not sit in our silos and have to really recognize the full import of the technology to really be able to think through governance issues. And so when we're looking at things like algorithms, data, these are some of the questions that we think about and really breaking down the different elements. So for example, who are building these, how are biases being addressed with algorithms, where are we actually locating the data? So we have all these data sovereignty issues. What data sets are we using? Because there's a big issue around that. And then of course, all the computing power that we need, not just the power itself, but what are all the other components of that? So when you're thinking about the power that needs to, the energy that we need to generate, these algorithms and to train, we get the training, the data sets, but you've got to actually train them, and the energy that consumes, that has to be part of our thinking. And so I think the very nature of artificial intelligence requires us to have not just a multi-stakeholder approach, but also a multi-lens approach. And I think what we do too often is we have a unique lens approach and a unique stakeholder approach. And so by unique lens, I mean, for example, only lawyers sitting in a room talking, or only techies sitting in a room and talking. And of course, in multi-stake, a single stakeholder is really just having the one person and not thinking through the different implications. So we hosted a stakeholder meeting in Kigali in October. Well, we're still in October, earlier this month. And one of the unique things was really trying to come against this siloed approach. So we had big tech, we had startups across the continent, we had lawyers.
Is it just me, or did we lose?
We lost
Isabel.
Isabel, I think we lost the voice. Can you please, maybe you can take the camera, switch off the camera?
Right. Also, Mr. Amr is back, so we can go back to that if you want.
Well, we talk about Africa, connectivity problems. So Isabel, sorry, we lost you, Isabel. So maybe, can I make a suggestion? Maybe the slides are putting a heavy pressure on the connection. Let's, just have the conversation.
We'll share the slides.
Yes, so we can share the slides later. Sorry, but that's the reality of what we live, right?
This is what we need to talk about. Exactly.
Exactly. So maybe if Isabel, you can continue your presentation, and then we'll go back to
where we dropped off. But yeah, essentially, we had a stakeholder recommendations from the meeting we had in October. And a lot of that talked about, the need to include youth, the need to ensure that we have these multi-stakeholder meetings, and also to be really contextualized. So a lot of the time we just look at how we adopt policies or governance from the global north. And it was really an opportunity for us to say, well, some things are very different for us. We have different needs. I think when we look at responsible AI, Africa really has the opportunity to create a legacy. And it's not to be romanticized. It's not because we are better, but it's because we have the opportunity to have both this dynamic youth that are hungry for AI, and we have a lot of things in place. A great youth population. We're a mobile first continent. We've got the context to really leveraging AI, but we also have the needs. So if you look at healthcare, for example, phenomenal opportunity for us to design AI into our healthcare strategies because we need to. And then you look at things like the gaps in our infrastructure, the fact that we don't have data sets that are already sitting there. We get to look at how we actually collect, structure, digitize these data sets in a way that is ethical and takes into account, inclusivity, tries to avoid biases, make sure that we are, using strong legal frameworks. And so I think we really have the opportunity to lead as the continent that really takes responsible AI seriously and becomes really the leader. But it requires really intentional leadership. It requires us to really think with multi-stakeholder and multi-lens approach. So you sit in rooms where you have the different disciplines together, you have the different experts together, you have, as we have on this call, academia plus legal plus private sector plus the startup community, and really sharing their perspectives. And I think that's where we really have the strength. It's almost like an advantage to be behind, and it's an opportunity for us to really leapfrog if we do it correctly. But we can only do it correctly if we do it collaboratively, because we all have different strengths that we're coming from. And I think for me, there are obviously a number of areas that I think we can focus on. Of course, I'd be happy if the team can share the presentation. But healthcare for me is super important. I think it's the no-brainer. If you look at how much deficit we have in the healthcare sector, we have, I think, something like 2 to every 1,000, patients, compared to Global North, which is maybe 25 to every 1,000. We have rural communities that are, completely out. You can use AI to look at diagnosis and telemedicine. So there are things like that that can really make a huge difference. And you need to think collaboratively. We have a health tech conference in Kigali being hosted at the moment between government of Kigali, government of Rwanda, Africa CDC, Smart Africa, and you had almost 2,800 delegates. This is the third year, but 2,800 delegates, about 400 of which were doctors. And I thought it was fascinating to see these really things coming to life. You had tech people in the room, you had doctors in the room, and one of the things we were saying, we had our legal team and our Certa Foundation team also there, because we're saying, hey, as you are talking about all the technical part, please keep in mind there's significant data protection, privacy, data transfer risks that we also need to take into account. And so healthcare for me is a very exciting area where I expect to see the #1 investments in healthcare in the next, apart, now it's fintech. I expect that to go into healthcare. The other area that I think we have to really work collaboratively on is climate and sustainability. So when you look at this push for AI adoption, we also have to be cognizant of the fact that there's a big energy requirement that comes with that. And it's not just a case of making sure that we have our infrastructure, but it's also making sure that we've got strategies around e-waste and strategies around really green transitioning, so that it's a dual process. You're pushing AI, but you're also being clear around some of the challenges that will come with that. And then the third area for me is really around research. We are very woefully underfunded. We, as Africans, we are our universities, not everybody has a research focus and looking at AI specifically. And we need to really invest in our researchers and ensure that we are also looking towards the future and not just living in somebody else's design of a future. And I think we don't spend enough time, we don't commit to research, and our governments have to be very strategic about that. We've got to be strategic about research to inform policy, but also research to support the entrepreneurial capacity of our African youth. So those are my perspectives. And again, thank you so much. It's lovely to meet you, Nagla, and really excited about this conversation.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Much appreciated. So you've touched on so many interesting points. I'll just keep, for the next round of questions and also from the audience, and then move on in the interest of time. I will ask Mr. Safwat, maybe without the slides, if you can just give us the gist of your, knowledge and expertise on multiculturalism and experiences. So please, Amr, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Nagla. Apologies once again, I was disconnected. As you might have known that I'm not in Cairo, I'm in Addis Ababa, so just taking part in another conference. So apologies for the disconnection. Well, just very quickly on the African strategy on AI and how it started very quickly, because to reach to what we really think of and how we consider multi-stakeholderism is a very important, actually it's an integral part of the work of the African working group on AI. Back in 2019, and of course I have to give credit to one of my very dear colleagues, but she's not anymore with the ministry. I'm sure she's well known to many of you, Sayed Radwan. At that time, we were taking part, of course, you know her very well. Yeah, we were taking part in most of the UNESCO, especially the UNESCO platforms on ethical AI, especially on ethics. And we realized at that time that the African voices and African representation was very minimal. I don't want to say it was even absent, but just to be very diplomatic, it was very minimal. Only very few countries, maybe 2 or 3 countries, and Egypt was one of them, were at the forefront. So we thought that Africa should have a common voice on AI, especially on the ethical part of AI. And should only because and this is the concept that we had, that if we were not among the forefront runners in the global dialogue on AI, we'll be left behind. So, and we can't afford as Africa to be left behind, especially when it comes to AI. So in 2019, we made the proposal to the African ministers. We had the 3rd meeting of African ministers of ICT. It was hosted in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. So, thankfully, it was adopted by honorable ministers, and we created the group. We had 3 mandates at this group. So first of all, is to establish our strategy on AI, a common strategy, which was adopted last July, as you have perfectly mentioned. Secondly, and thirdly, and this has to do with the multi-stakeholders that we'll be working with. Of course, at the beginning, it was only confined to government representatives, because we wanted to get the strategy done. But I'll tell you also what we have done on the multi-stakeholder engagement in the strategy. But the first mandate was the adoption and establishment of the strategy. Secondly, is to have to design a capacity building, a continent-wide capacity building program for everyone. And thirdly, the third mandate is investments, the involvement of private sector. If we talk very quickly on what we do throughout the process, of course, we had numerous meetings among the working group. And at the very last stages, we thought that after we had a skeleton on the AI strategy, it was a must that we had to involve all the stakeholders. So we organized with the AU Commission a series of online consultative meetings with multi-stakeholders. So we had the voice of the academia, of the NGOs, of the private sector, of course, they were on board as well. So this collaboration was the first demonstration of collaboration on AI among multi-stakeholders in the African continent, between the government and the other stakeholders that were involved as well. Very quickly, of course, we have 7 pillars in our strategy in Africa. Among them which is very interesting as well, one of the pillars is the ethical AI. And the second pillar as well, or another pillar, is the involvement of multi-stakeholders. Everyone should be on board, especially when we're focusing so much on academia, private sector, because what we believe in is that the government is there to make the data for AI systems to work. They should be making it available. Academia will take this data and will process it to come up with AI solutions. Thirdly, and then private sector will incubate this whole process. So we can't do it on our own. We can't work on our own. Among the very interesting pillars as well is to have AI systems to address the African needs, because one of our principles is to be African-centric AI strategy. It was so easy to copy and paste from any other regions of the world on AI strategies. We have numerous of them, but we were so mindful at that time that it should be addressed and directed to the African needs, to the African challenges, because all of us know that Africa has its own unique challenges, and at the same time as well, has its own distinctive needs as well for socioeconomic development. So the main idea is to harness AI, as you just have mentioned in the introduction, and this was reflected in the vision of the AI strategy, is to harness AI to address the socioeconomic needs of Africa and to address the challenges. So among the very critical sectors, as well as AI for healthcare, AI for education. And I know that my sister Isabel, just who spoke before me, she was touching on healthcare and she was so much interested in that. So this was one of the among these critical sectors: education, public services, delivery of public services, which was a big nightmare to most of the African citizens whenever they wanted to process in the very conventional ways. So public sector as well. For peace and security, Africa is among the most continents in the world that suffers from, whether from coup d'etats, from political conflicts. So we wanted to use AI in an ethical manner to stop, or as much as possible, try to limit all those conflicts and armed disputes on the continent. We're also mindful of the involvement of AI in the private sector. We want the private sector to use AI in an ethical way. So that's why ethics is very important to us. I don't want to go so much into the details of the strategy, but very quickly on the role of multi-stakeholderism and how we approach it in the African strategy as well. Actually, and it's just as I touched as well on the principles and pillars of the strategy is embodied in it, multi-stakeholderism, the role of multi-stakeholders. That's very important. We are done with the first mandate of the African Working Group on AI. The second mandate and the third multi-stakeholders, other than governments, are the main players. They'll be the main players. They'll be the main actors. Because if we talk about capacity building, definitely the government should be there. We should always be there. And of course, I have to take credit for that as well as a government representative. But at the same time, it's very important for capacity building to go through the academia. They're the ones who will be delivering those courses. And we're so mindful, we don't want capacity building programs only for AI developers or those who are like either working or studying AI. No, what is really important, even more important to us, is the grassroots, is those who will be using AI. There is a cultural misconception, not only in Egypt, but as well as in Africa. This is what I also saw, like whenever I visited an African country and we talked to the ordinary citizens, if you talk to them, a lot of them will think that AI is only for the wealthy. It's only just to pamper yourself. So it's not like they weren't really vigilant of the immense benefits that it could bring to their own livelihoods and to their living styles as well. And to be honest, at the policymaker level, a lot of policymakers, especially the parliamentarians, once you go to MPs, members of parliament, when you talk to them, they would tell them, okay, what AI are you talking about? We just want to feed our people first. We want to stop the natural disasters that is affecting our economies. So so this is very important to have not only capacity building programs for everyone, but as well as for the awareness program as well. On the third mandate is investments, the private sector. So the private sector to be in very good shape, to be very well aligned with the strategies and the policies of the governments. That is very important because at the end of the day, you want the private sector to be there because they have the money. They're the ones who will be creating the jobs. They're the ones who will be incubating all those AI applications in most cases. What is also important as well to talk about ethical AI, to use AI in a more ethical way is of immense importance because our next mandate now, and this is what we're working on in the African Working Group, is to have an African strategy, African charter on responsible AI, to be using AI in a more responsible manner. And I just don't want to talk so much about this in terms of time, but just very quickly.
I will have a question about this.
Just in conclusion, it was, we were very happy as well that we were approached by many international, whether international partners working on AI, for example, the OECD. We had the first round back in March in the OECD headquarters, and we'll be happy to have the second round in Cairo, inshallah, in November, late November. We'll be definitely more than happy to welcome you all on this. We were also approached by the EU, by the Council of Europe, by the UNDP. So, and what really added to our happiness is that they started approaching us Like we had a plan to start approaching the entire world, but it went vice versa, and we were so happy about this. Apologies for thinking so much, but whenever it's something very close to my heart, it's like my baby. So that's why I feel so passionate about it. Thank you so much, Doctor.
Thank you so much. And I think the event that's happening in November, my students are here and they know this is why I won't be there, because we will be at the event. And also my colleague, Rachel, who's heading the observatory, will be there as well. So small world. So thank you very much, Mr. Safwat. I really appreciate your intervention. So, and you mentioned very important points. I'm just going to take the thread of the private sector and I turn to Mr. Silas Adikondle, private sector. Let's hear it from you, Silas. Thank you very much for joining us. If you would, in 10 minutes or so, give us your thoughts from your area of expertise about the topic today. Go ahead, Silas. The floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you can hear me okay. Just checking. Perfect. Yeah, great to meet some of you. I'm sure it's not the last time we'll be speaking. So really excited to see these conversations being had. I do have a few slides to share. I'll try. I think we're all traveling, so they'll bring some picture to the conversation. But if it's creating any issues, I'll pull back. So just please let me know once you see what I'm sharing as well.
Yes, it's there.
There. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So we are Awari. And quickly, so offering the private sector perspective, Awari is based out of Nigeria, working out of Lagos. We have offices in London as well. I travel quite a bit. I'm a global citizen. I studied in the UK, did robotics. So I work at the frontier of technologies. And a few years back, about 6-7 years ago, when we started Awari, it was really from a place of seeing what's going on in the rest of the world, knowing that the gap is so wide. This was even before the AI the recent AI takeoff, knowing that the gap was so wide and knowing that there was a critical need for us to start capacity building in Africa to enable the development and adoption of frontier technology. So that was the mission that Awari set out to achieve. One of the points that Isobel actually mentioned in our talk was around the importance of Africa being a key part of the conversation, not because we're better, but because we have so much more to offer. I think there is a lot locked away in what we call native intelligence, the approach that we take at Awari, that we can offer to the global stage. And I believe every culture is a representation of what it means to be human. And so when we're talking about this planet, it's really, really important, for not just for the sake of inclusion, but for the future of this planet, that there is an opportunity for, as technology level increases, that there is representation from every culture. So Awari literally means seek and find. And as I mentioned, we take this native intelligence approach. We are a social enterprise, so I think we might be the largest AI company in Africa right now. Here are some of our team, mostly young people, as there's been a lot of talk around who's going to be building AI, who's going to be adopting AI. But one of the key, before we even go into the approaches that we're taking, what is the real problem right now? AI is a technology that we're adopting in Africa right now in retrospect. So it's been built in other parts of the world, and now we're trying to fit in. And of course, you're going to find lots of problems where AI isn't quite working the right way, and that primarily comes down to a data problem. So I'm sure we're all very aware of the problem: infrastructure, energy, compute. So those are the first layers which many countries are now starting to try to solve. How do you make sure there's electricity? We have to do that both in parallel. You can't wait till all of the infrastructure is built to then start to look at the application, because the gap will start to widen. So we decided to focus on the next layer, which is to do with the AI software infrastructure side of things. So quickly, to talk you through what the real problem is of AI adoption in Africa. It's a complex, multidimensional problem. We've got multilingual complexity, which when you get into the details, let's talk about large language models, which everyone's really excited about. That's really important because of information transfer and knowledge transfer. And today, large language models offer ways for people to easily talk to computer systems to be able to access insights, based on complex amounts of information. But they're primarily initially were built on, at the core of AI models is what's called tokenization, which is how do you turn things that exist in the real world into something that's AI understandable. And when you look at African languages, for example, some have symbols, tonality, things like that. It becomes a lot more complex to actually tokenize them, to represent them, which means they become even more expensive for AI systems to use. So it's not just a case of catching up from an infrastructure point of view. It's also now expensive for Africa to actually play in the AI game because it's not built with African contexts in mind. That's the first thing. At the start, Nagli, you mentioned cultural renaissance as a key part of the African Union strategy, right? You can't have cultural renaissance without talking of heritage. And when you're talking of heritage, when you're looking at culture, their visual, their history. And so when you start going to that part as well, you've got this diversity that's not kind of being represented. And then the final part is data fragmentation. Many countries, if we're talking about Africa as a whole, there's different levels of technology adoption. And what you then have is fragmentation at different levels. Is the data sitting in the private sector? Is a specific ministry digitized enough to actually have the data ready for AI to start to use things there? So it required a step back to understand what comes next after the hardware, the real world infrastructure layer, before you actually get to the AI applications. So I'll give you an example of what we're doing in Nigeria. Again, Nigeria is the largest country from a population's point of view. So our mission is to enable, again, the development and adoption of frontier technology in Africa. We're starting in Nigeria because we think if we solve problems there, we'll be able to share examples that can be relevant across other parts of Africa. So what we've really focused on is critical infrastructure. We've started going back to the foundation, building platforms that allow you to digitize languages or digitize ways of life, really, for African contexts. And we've done it in a way that it's adaptable across different countries. So we have a platform, for example, when it comes to language data called Langeezy, working with the population, so representation across all of the different regions of Nigeria. I'll talk about public-private partnerships as well, because it's also really important that governments get behind this. So in Nigeria, there's an initiative called the 3 Million Tech Talent that's been created by the Ministry of Innovation. And one of the things that they're focused on is how do you make sure that young people understand what AI is, get some education in AI, and can actually interact with AI so that they are understanding this in the same way that their counterparts in the West have interacted with these technologies over many years. That initiative meant that you have representation across all of the country, speaking different languages, representing the different ways of life, who could then come along and contribute to this platform to start to build capture data that can go into language models. So that's one of the things that we're doing, again, in collaboration with the government, making sure that everyone's understanding, when it really comes to ethics, what is this data? How is it being used? What will it do for the country? Making sure that this is a collaborative effort. As we build that foundation in a way that is a platform type of approach, then the next layer on top is, for the first time, we're building a nationalized large language model. So we're working in partnership with the government to build something we're calling Niger GPT right now. We also have a few different models that will be accessible to the private sector to really accelerate their work. But keeping in mind, these models will be different to the types that you've interacted with in the West, because they'll be able to speak the languages locally. But not just that, they'll be more efficient because of how the data is structured. And this is what we mean by we really have to go back to the roots to look at the African context and not just adopting the technologies, but starting to see what we can really offer, to the world. So when we're talking about collaboration, it's very, very critical. You've got public-private partnerships with the federal government, for example, in Nigeria. One of the things that the government also did was to create something called an AI collective, which was a collaboration between industry, academia, and a lot of governing bodies as well, which allowed you to have this interaction and intersection where these difficult conversations can be had, but also it acts as an engine for private sector companies like us who are looking to make sure that we keep Africa at the forefront of technology development as well. We also partnered with larger, so I think startups are going to be really, really critical here, African grown startups, because we might have missed some parts of the hardware infrastructure game. You have many companies that exist already when it comes to telcos, all of these foundations that the internet is built on top of. But when it comes to the day-to-day problems that Africans are having and that AI is going to be used to solve, it has to be, built by Africans for Africans. And so it's really, really important to then start looking at how do African companies collaborate with existing structural infrastructure so that that next layer that is built by African companies that are closer to the problem, and so that the solutions are very, very contextually relevant. So, that's the approach that we're taking, which hopefully has a lot of insights for everyone. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Cyrus. It's super interesting. Again, lots of insights, but I will not take the time. I'll keep my questions for after our next speaker. But brilliant example also of public-private partnerships and the multi-stakeholder approach. I will then move on to our last but not least, our speaker, Ms. Leonida Mutuku. She will talk to us about role of communities of practice in the design, deployment, and scaling of responsible AI on the continent. Leonida, the floor is yours. Up to 10 minutes, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Nagla and Dr. Fola, for having me in this webinar.
I think we're missing. Are you cutting, Leonida? Yes, yeah. Do you want to, are you sharing slides or? I think
can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now, yes. So
okay,
maybe.
I don't know.
Go ahead.
Okay. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you, Leonida. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Sorry. Okay, as I mentioned, just like my fellow panelists, I'm also traveling, but I hope we'll keep it stable for now. So as we aspire to a more AI-enabled future, we acknowledge the need for partnerships. And I think my fellow panelists have mentioned, very specific ways that they are pursuing these partnerships to fully realize the benefits of AI and ensure these benefits are accessible to all. I'll try in this talk to potentially create a model around these partnerships and provide examples of how we're approaching it. So as has been mentioned before, the AU AI strategy and most of our emerging domestic policy and strategies on AI are heavily reliant on partnerships to be realized for execution. But our approach and what I want to focus on today is thinking about the idea of communities of practice and how we can reimagine these structures that originate from the business world to design, deploy, and scale responsible AI in Africa, especially as we consider what we are calling our own decolonial AI future. So the concept of COPs was extensively explored in the early 2000s by the Harvard Business School and was building on earlier research by Etienne Wagner and Jean Love on apprenticeship and learning structures. And here they defined communities of practice as individuals who share common interests or passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. So typically members of COPs develop a shared repertoire of resources, experiences, stories, tools, and ways of addressing recurring problems. But in practice, communities of practice can take various forms. So from our previous speakers, we've had about the multidisciplinary approach, where we're bringing different experts from different fields, such as the AI developers themselves, and whether it's researchers such as anthropologists and sociologists, civil societies such as ourselves, and policymakers to address this issue holistically. But I think communities of practice could also be niche in the sense that they focus on a very specific area of AI development. For instance, natural language processing for local languages, or AI in agriculture and healthcare, as was mentioned earlier, which allow for really deep specialization in the conversation engagement and innovation that results from that. So in our work at LDRI, we have been exploring how we can leverage communities of practice to define Afrocentric responsible AI design, development and deployment, but also, most importantly, its governance. So one of the challenges that of AI being deployed on the continent, and has been mentioned by Silas before, is that it is designed in a different context, meaning it is trained on non-representative data sets, and therefore needs to be localized or adapted to meet grassroots needs and interests. The process is not straightforward and requires more than just retraining models for each use case. It requires participation across the board by those with the lived experience, those with the domain expertise, and those whose lives will be affected by this AI. In the last few years, the private sector and development partners have been investing in local AI development to address gaps in responsible AI, including funding for research and evidence building into what responsible AI is from an African perspective and how it is governed. The current call right now is for Africa to leapfrog the way we did with the mobile technologies. But personally, I don't like this word leapfrogging. I think it assigns like an arbitrary destination and asks us to skip some of the necessary steps needed to get there. But if we need to leapfrog to an AI-enabled future, then we are also hearing that we need to advocate for open source AI development. So the argument here has been that open source initiatives over the years have significantly contributed to technology innovation by making software and data freely available and encourage collective development to solve common technology challenges. While open source has enabled collective pooling of the necessary building blocks for technologies to create custom solutions without having to recreate from the ground up. In the context of AI development, we are talking about digital public goods such as open training data sets and models, which are necessary for researchers and developer communities to advance solutions for AI. However, it's not just enough to open source and expect the resulting innovations to be deployed responsibly. So remember, AI is just a tool, and therefore we need user-centered, people-centric approaches to how this tool is deployed and used responsibly. So secondly, I think open sourcing mostly works for Western contexts as it did in the early days of building the internet. Because they leaned into what was coined by a researcher, Clay Sharkey, as cognitive surplus. So this is the idea that people will contribute their expertise and hacks to make software better for all during their free time. But as we all know, and has also been mentioned, AI deployment is very capital intensive, and the current funding for it, particularly for AI in development, has been limited to pilots and proof of concepts. And we are still struggling with business models to sustainably scale responsible AI, especially when we find ourselves in direct competition to better resourced big techs. So open source goods such as AI training data sets are also produced from community resources. Remember, when you're talking about languages are owned by community members. And if these data sets are to be produced for generative AI models, their use, depending on who is using the data sets, may end up being more extractive than beneficial to these communities, especially if value is not assigned to the data and recognized explicitly in the value chain. So if we are collecting data from communities, then are we ensuring that we're not gatekeeping its benefits from the resulting AI due to prohibitive issues such as affordability and the digital divide? So my argument is that if we move from just open sourcing and trying to use that kind of approach to building a responsible AI, communities of practice can better enhance that open source movement by creating opportunities for focused engagement, specifically with what the community needs, and creating opportunities for a common voice for strategic advocacy. So communities of practice are better able to articulate the challenges facing their constituents, so people who are members of the community of practice, ensuring that the AI solutions are directly aligned with their actual needs. Through COPs, also the diverse stakeholders identify, through creative brainstorming, a wider range of applications and innovative use cases that have a greater chance of success based on lived experience. And COPs also provide opportunities for ownership over projects through collective action and create personal investments into the success. And I'm really happy that Silas has mentioned something like the AI collective that is happening in Nigeria. So I will share other examples of communities of practices that are actively working towards responsible AI design. In Kenya, one of our AI COPs has been working together with partnership of the National Bureau of Standards to develop a voluntary AI code of conduct as a self-governance mechanism that can be adopted to ensure that AI is deployed and developed responsibly. The AI COP has also developed, in partnership with the Global Partnership on Sustainable Development Data, an AI practitioner's guide that is really practical steps on how to ensure that in the context of Kenya, this is how you can deploy, develop, and build an ecosystem around a responsible AI. There are more niche communities of practices such as Masahane and the Ken Corpus that have brought together NLP researchers who contribute towards repositories of language training data, but also convene to define the governance and applications of these data sets. The Global Center for AI Governance mentioned the AI Policymakers Network that they are convening together with GIZ, which provide opportunities for peer exchange between policymakers in Asia and Africa, where best AI governance practices are shared. So I think as my last contribution, I'll give a specific example of how LDRI, together with the Lacuna Fund and the AI4D network, are exploring how COPs that include government stakeholders, innovators, and AI researchers can lead to the development of more sustainable and responsible AI solutions and training data sets, as well as their governance. So we are working with theory that is focused on if AI solutions are developed, especially when we are looking at agriculture and climate-focused AI solutions, they are mostly sustainable and effective at national and regional scale. So government stakeholders may not always be technically knowledgeable on AI, but they are the best to articulate national needs and priorities in their sectors. So working together over a period of time with researchers, those who are actually surfacing the AI training data sets, as well as the creativity of innovators and startups, we can build localized AI solutions. And such a community of practice produces shared knowledge infrastructures, a common understanding on ethical approaches, and based on this common understanding, how we can govern AI for our contexts, and ultimately increasing the likelihood of successful adoption of innovative, responsible AI solutions that scale and are beneficial to the wider society. So over the next year or so, we will be working with various policymakers across the continent, as well as the innovation communities, to see how such a focused community of practice can really lead to scalable and sustainable AI solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leonida. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Now, I had prepared questions for the speakers, but I don't want to take the time of the audience as well. So what I'm going to do, in the interest of time, is I'm going to read the questions that I had for the speakers for them to think about. And then I'm going to also present a couple of questions from the audience, and then the speakers can choose, to address as we go. So I'm just going to read, I had prepared for Leonida a question. The 10th area of action from the strategy provides for the adoption and implementation of ethical principles for AI that respect, and then there's a list: human rights, protection of children, responsible and unbiased AI, intellectual property. But one of these subdivisions is, I will read it, diversity, inclusivity, and African culture and values. Example, the inclusion of women as well as vulnerable persons, including migrants and people with disabilities, and values such as Ubuntu, which respects the collective community over individuality. This is just for you to think about, because I'm going to, and then it's open, of course, for the speakers who would like to handle it. So one question was, how, and we need to also remember the topic of the webinar, that multi-stakeholder approach. How can a multi-stakeholder approach contribute to help us achieve this objective? So just for you to think about, and it's open for everyone else. Another question I had, that is also for Isobel, and also Silas is welcome to take a go at it, is that the strategy has 15 action areas. 3 of them read as follows. The 4th reads the adoption of AI by the private sector, including SMEs. The 5th area of action, creating an enabling environment for a vibrant and inclusive AI startup ecosystem. So we're looking at the private sector, the startup ecosystem. The 12th action aims at accelerating public and private investment in AI in Africa. So again, for Isobel and for Cyrus, to just think about them. How can we ensure this enabling environment? Where do we start? And again, how can a multi-stakeholder approach take us forward? It's just opening up the discussion. And then last but not least, also for Mr. Safwat, again, a question I had in mind, and before I move on to the audience questions, is the first of the 15 action areas. Code provides for the establishment of an appropriate AI governance system and regulations at regional and national levels. So one of the things that has come up, and the challenges in aligning national and regional policies, especially when it comes to governance of AI, right? How can they be overcome? And relevant to our context, how can a multi-stakeholder approach achieve that? So I will ask my speakers to just keep that in mind, and to respect the audience questions, allow me to just jump to the audience questions, and then I'll give every speaker the chance to respond, in a number of minutes, so that we have a fair floor to everyone. So, how can stakeholders, I'm just reading from the audience questions. How can stakeholders ensure that data privacy is upheld in AI implementation, particularly in countries where data protection laws may be less developed? This is for the speakers, and you can pick, so one question about data privacy. Another, how should the potential displacement of jobs, this might have come from one of my students, because this is something we talk about a lot, the future of work, by AI be addressed, and what proactive measures can be taken to support affected workers? And again, from me, how can a multi-stakeholder approach take place? So there's just plenty of food for thought, data privacy, displacement of jobs. And then I take a third question: what steps can be taken to mitigate bias, mitigate biases in AI algorithms developed for African contexts, ensuring fairness and outcomes? So what I'm doing is really sort of giving you, key points or keywords to start the conversation and responses. There is data privacy, jobs, the future of work, displacement of jobs specifically by AI, bias in AI algorithms, for Africa. These are 3 topics that were raised by the audience. There are plenty of questions, but I just pick these. And then what I had, in mind also for you, for the speakers. So if each speaker would like to take like maybe up to 3 minutes to respond to any question of your choice. And let's have this round of answers and see how that takes us with respect to time. So who would like to begin in no special order? Leonida, maybe because you spoke last, should we start with you?
Sure. I'm happy to answer the question you posed around diversity, inclusivity, and the last one on bias in AI algorithms. So I personally believe that as Africans, we need to aspire to participate in different levels of the AI value chain. So as active designers of the AI, as active developers of the AI, and as active consumers of the AI. So AI is not happening to us, but we are actively engaged. And this is, in this sense, if as active participants in the design of AI, ultimately the AI that is being deployed to make decisions about our lives is based on data about ourselves. So it's really important for AI developers to ensure that they seek clear consent, communicate exactly what the AI will do, what the data they will be collecting from community members, and by keeping members of the community informed, then they are able to have active decisions about what how their data will be used and the resulting AI. As active developers of the AI, we represent our own communities, and so have the lived experiences that we can bring to model development. And so this is one of the ways that we ensure that there's inclusivity and diversity by expanding who is actually building the AI and their representation. So having more women AI developers, more AI developers from marginalized communities, I think is really important. And it also starts addressing the issue of bias, because you start noticing that, I mean, all AI systems are biased, but you can make sure that you acknowledge the bias in the system based on your experience, and where it can be changed, you can change that. So in terms of multi-stakeholderism, it's important then for these collaborations then to ensure that AI practitioners operate in an enabling environment by providing adequate resources. So how can we finance the education and the access to infrastructure that is needed for AI to benefit wider communities, the skills, the research opportunities to really ensure that the AI is Afrocentric. And finally, a favorable regulatory framework that ensures that AI deployed on the continent is actually beneficial to everyone, and that no one is left behind.
Thank you very much. So let's go in. Thank you very much, Leonida. Let's go in reverse order. So maybe Silas, if you'd like to take up the next question of your choice, the one directed to you, or any question of your choice, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. I'll just talk points that go through the various threads of some of the questions. I agree with everything that Leonida has mentioned in terms of the true way to really encourage diversity is to make sure there's representation in people that are building the technologies as well. We're seeing this on a global scale. And so it matters both on the macro scale and on the micro scale in each country and each region, as you're starting to look at AI development and adoption. On the topic of AI by private sectors and SMEs as well, I think that I'm more qualified to speak on. The real challenge for us is, a lot of African countries are suffering from brain drain. Everybody knows this, as they call it. I don't quite like the word brain drain. It's not a case of, there's many intelligent people in Africa. It's just a matter of getting the tools there and giving enough economic incentive for people to devote their efforts, to Africa. And if you look at, my situation, for example, I travel around the world, but there are two things, hitches you're trying to scratch. The development of these technologies is an intellectual endeavor. You need to have fundamental research, to keep people excited about solving problems. It's from there that solutions now develop. And I think that's something that we really, really need to invest in. I think someone had mentioned it earlier, either Isabel or Leonida, regarding just going back to the roots. We need to establish research centers. And I don't think it's just academic pursuits and papers, but applied research that are looking at, we can't afford at this stage to, maybe I'll say some controversial things, to just do some purely open-ended research. They need to be guided by problems for now in the short term, just because there is so much work to do. So I think that's one thing that needs to be looked at from an infrastructure and capacity building in Africa as a whole, generalizing there. When it comes to how do smaller companies, SMEs that are now building fintech solutions, building the next layer, how do they, actually get to play in the AI game so that, people can use it? That's the strategy, the whole why we're doing what we're doing at Awari from a native intelligence point of view. Again, I think this is something that will need to happen in each country, so that you have the domain expertise, the relevance. We're building our technology in a way where it can be adopted across multiple countries, so that we're working collaboratively as African countries, African startups, African businesses, to enable each other so that we can grow quite well and fast, so that we can also start to have something to contribute globally as well. So those are the two angles I would take.
Thank you very much, Cyrus. And if I may comment, I agree with you 100%, is that the fact that research can inform private sector or policy, that's an example of multi-stakeholder collaboration. That's precisely why research, should be done to solve problems for businesses or at the policy level. So thank you for that comment. Let me then move to Isobel. I'm going in reverse order. So Isobel, would you like to address the point and maybe speak to the priority legal frameworks that can be addressed in fostering collaboration, multi-stakeholder, or any of the questions that I have raised? Isobel, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A couple of things. I think one, on the gender side, obviously a clear bias. So there's one of the quotes I was reading, she just said that if we just unlock the potential of young African women, we literally double the amount, of work that we can do. And so I think there's a real focus to ensure that we're really empowering young women, not just to look at AI as a STEM subject, but there's so many aspects of it as we're discussing today. So you need those who are going to build, but those who are also going to be part of governing and creating and training and educating. And so I think that's really important, but also looking at gender bias from different angles, where you're now seeing a lot of issues around technology facilitated GBV. We're actually hosting an event around that, because this new level of digitization, as much as there's opportunities, there's also now inherent risks. So everything we do in the real world is also now being replicated in the digital world. And we're seeing a huge increase in technology facilitated gender-based violence, and that needs to be captured in as well. I think on legal frameworks, it is a huge issue. And I think Silas touched on this, Leonidas as well. We need to make sure that our laws are actually coherent. So right now, even if you look at data protection, I think out of the 55 countries, 37 have data protection laws, and those laws are not necessarily consistent. So some people have adopted huge elements of GDPR, but not even copied the same elements. And if you do that, even for business communities, you talk about big business that can afford legal counsel, that can afford to have multiple counsel in different jurisdictions. It's a very expensive endeavor. But if you think about it from the startup perspective or the SME perspective, you're really hindering business when you don't have coherent, consistent, wholesome laws. And so the legal frameworks have to be really looked at. And I think the AU AI strategy is a fantastic start. And I think it's something that we should be very proud of as Africans, but also now not just leave it at that level, but really think, how do we really ensure that this is implemented in a way that continues that consistency? This is just the broad picture, but how do we now pull out elements of that and really think through all the different aspects, right? So how do we leverage the data protection laws that we have? How do we think through things like intellectual property? As you're looking at, big language learning models, how do we make sure that you're actually looking at things like deep fakes, like I said, the technology assisted crimes? How do we create some standardized policies or standard, for industry, so that you have something to work from? And I think the big bulk of the work is going to happen now around really bringing that consistency. Otherwise, it's just going to stay as a great strategy, but it will not be enforceable. And if we're going to really see progress, we need to make sure that people can move very quickly. We don't use the law or regulation to hinder or frustrate the community. And then lastly, on the startups and the private sector, I think this is really where we really need to unlock the potential that we have. If we look at a lot of the research says, something like 3 million USD can be unlocked by African, like just creating, developing, AI solutions. And I think if you look at where we are, I think there's a lot of excitement. We've got some good political will, as you can see from the strategy, but we need to be very intentional. We need to be intentional about the infrastructure requirements that we need to support startups with. And then, like Salis was saying, the research is such a big issue. And I think we normally on the continent, we do not spend enough time or money on research. But when we think of research, we think of it as an academic endeavor. And sometimes we think of it as informing policy, but we don't really think about the fact that research has to inform venture building. And if we can support our ventures with research, if we can support them with data, with access to information, if we can make sure that they can get the licenses, if we can create sandboxes for them to have a safe space to grow and test the ideas. And we have to be intentional. So when you see companies like Silas's, there are a number of incredible African companies across the continent. We just have to say, look, let's just take the top 20 and intentionally invest in them, right? We have to be very, very dramatic. And I think sometimes we make these really smart people then have to decide, okay, well, let me just go sit in America where my value and my talent is going to be rewarded, right? I know a lot of African entrepreneurs who might get X in America, but they will take a smaller amount to stay on the continent and deliver. But it cannot be free. It has to be an amount. And I love what Silas said, economic incentives. It has to be a real amount that compensates the work, the energy, their time. And we would lose less people if we were more intentional. So we've got to identify those talents and just say, as governments, as regional bodies, we're going to invest in this company because this company has the potential to unlock real value, to create jobs, and to move us forward as a continent.
Thank you very much, Isabel. And this links to the future of work, because then it talks to building human capacity, but I know that's another conversation. Also talk about skills and skill development.
Exactly.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Last but not least, I'm going to turn to our wonderful Mr. Amr Safwat to tell us again a macro picture about the strategy. How can the challenges about aligning national regional policies? There's another question I can't resist just posing to you. I can't resist. It came from the audience. How can African countries balance the need for rapid AI development with the ethical considerations and social implications? Again, this is a policy question about the urge and the need to move on with AI and making sure that it is ethical, responsible, etc. So if you just give us sort of a policy perspective, that would be really wonderful. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Nagla, and thanks a lot to all the speakers. It was very insightful just to listen to all of them. Apologies, there's some distraction or whatever, but yeah, I can't help it. Yeah, because I'm on a public place. Anyway, so yeah, thank you so much for all the insights as well and for the questions of the audience. Actually, what I can realize from your own question, Dr. Nagla, and the questions that has been posed by the audience, whether the ones that you have kindly read them out or the ones that were written on the chat, that they are talking on two main issues. First of all is on the whether AI should be governed or not, whether AI there should be have a separate bill, a separate legal bill on AI or not. And this is an international debate. This is a very big debate. You can see not even like the most advanced countries in the world who have a very clear policy on AI, they don't yet have a legal framework for AI. They don't have a legal bill for AI yet, because, and this is the conversation I had with one of my very dear friends working at the UK. He's from the UK government, working on AI policies and AI laws as well. He told me that this is the debate we have within the national context at the UK, that mainly we don't really need a separate bill on AI, but because for several reasons. Because we thought that it will be stifling the technology, stifling or suffocating the developers. But at the same time, and as one of our dear speakers has also mentioned, and I was really happy to hear this coming from a non-state representative, I think it was Isabel, when she said that we need an AI governance framework to help the private sector work. So I'm really happy to hear this as well. But what I can say is that we don't really, it's not a must to have a specific AI legal bill, but at the same time, there are other many complementary laws that are so much important, even more important than an AI law, specific law. For example, if you have consumer protection laws, data governance, IPRs, intellectual property rights. So all those, if you don't have those laws well enacted and you have a special or a specific AI legal bill, the specific AI legal bill will not be able to produce a conducive AI, responsible AI ecosystem. So it's very important as well to be mindful of those acts and those bills as well, to be enacted in your own respective country. So like only a few countries in the world, they have an AI bill. It's not really a must that you have it, but what is very important is to have a policy. This is very important, to have your own strategy or national strategy. That's the first one. Secondly, and this addresses also the question that has to do with AI ethics, you must have a charter on AI. This is number two. That's very important. Three, which is very important as well, is awareness campaigns. You have to have awareness campaigns for everyone, just to be vigilant on how to use AI in a more ethical way. There's also another question, it's very related to this, on data governance, and whether is how to protect your personal data, especially for countries who do not have a law on personal data. Unfortunately, when it comes to data governance or protection of personal data, you can't help it. You must have a law on it. You must have law, it should be implemented, and it should be implemented through one of your DPOs or DPAs, which is a Data Protection Authority organization, whatever the names are numerous. So, but you must have a law enforcing institution that enforces data governance and to be used in a proper way and to protect personal data as well. Very last question on the balance between AI ethics and AI ethics and the culture of Africa. That's what we were so mindful of during drafting the strategy. And during like for 3 years or 4 years, we've been drafting the strategy, I've been talking a lot and been like engaging with many stakeholders as well. And we're so much mindful that the strategy should address the African context. It should be addressing the localization aspect of AI, because, for example, if you talk about language, remember many speakers talked about the local languages. A lot of people think, and this is what I thought when I was a kid, that only English and French are the most spoken languages in Africa. But on the African continent, and to my surprise as well, that we have more than 2,000 languages on the African continent soil. Only English and French are the least spoken languages. So localization is very important because we have to cater to the demand side, the people who will be using AI. And for private sector to be encouraged to invest more in AI, there should be a very big demand, a strong demand on AI applications. And this is how the ecosystem, a conducive ecosystem works. So that's why we're so mindful about that. We're also so mindful about the culture of the localization of data. And I remember that some of the speakers also talked about the unrepresentative data that most of the AI systems are built on in Africa, which is very true. We have to create our own data, and not only very simple data, but the quality data as well. It should be more representing the culture of Africa, as well as it should be representing the challenge that you're tackling through your AI research. So I'm just trying to combine all the questions in one answer. I'm being mindful of the time, but this is an endless topic. I'd love to, of course, engage more on that, but of course, I'm very mindful of the time. So thank you so much. I'll be happy to.
Thank you so much, Mr. Safwat. Thank you. We are out of time, unfortunately. There's so much to talk about. I hope that this just is a start of a continuing conversation. The link to the strategy was offered in the chat. Please check out the African strategy. There's so much to talk about. And I hope this, as I said, this will be the beginning of continuing conversations. There are plenty of themes. We've heard about, collaboration between public-private sector, data privacy, governance issues, legal frameworks, collaboration between, the research, the purpose of research. Very important. Research is private sector academia. The tension, I think, between national and regional governance would be something to continue to read about and learn about and work on. As I said, we are scratching the surface. There's so much to talk about, but having done that, we have heard so many wonderful insights. We are out of time. So what remains for me is to sincerely thank my wonderful speakers, our partners at the African Observatory, Dr. Rachel Adams, who's in the audience, and Dr. Fula Adeleki. I also thank Mr. Amr Safwat, I'm going to use the formal, Miss Isabel Aqua, Mr. Silas Adikunle, Miss Leonida Motuku. I'm delighted to get, to meet Silas and Leonida for the first time today. I hope this will be the first of many collaborations. And with Mr. Amr, we have communicated before. Again, I'll see you at the OECD event in Cairo, and I see Rachel as well. Thank you all, and thanks to the speakers, to my audience, wonderful audience, great questions, including students. Thanks to the A2K4D team, the MENA Observatory team, and our partners at the African Observatory team. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of day, afternoon, evening, and we will continue the conversation. Please stay tuned, and I'll see you all, talk to you very soon, I hope. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Nagla. Great to meet you all.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.